Rain hit my windshield so hard I could barely see the road, and that was the exact moment a man stumbled out of the darkness and into my headlights. I slammed the brakes. My tires screamed against the wet asphalt, and my heart jumped into my throat. For one terrible second, I thought I had hit him, but he was standing, swaying, one hand pressed against his side, staring at my car like he couldn't quite believe it was real. I sat frozen behind the wheel, my knuckles white on the steering wheel, my breath coming out in short, shaky bursts. The street was empty, no other cars, no streetlights working on this stretch of road. Just me, my old sedan, and a stranger who looked like he had walked straight out of some kind of trouble. I should have driven away. Every instinct told me to lock my doors and go. But something about the way he stood there, lost and unsteady, made me roll down my window instead. "Are you hurt?" I called out, my voice trembling more than I wanted it to. He blinked at me, rain running down his face, plastering dark hair to his forehead. For a moment, he didn't answer. Then he took a slow step toward my car, favoring one side, like walking cost him something. "I'm fine," he said, though his voice was tight and strained. "I just need to get somewhere, please." I glanced in my rearview mirror out of habit, checking for headlights that weren't there. My name is Claire Bennett, and if you had asked me that morning whether I was the kind of woman who picked up strangers on dark roads, I would have laughed and said absolutely not. I worked at a small accounting office. I paid my bills on time. I made careful decisions. I did not do reckless things. And yet here I was, unlocking my passenger door. "Get in," I said, before I could talk myself out of it. "It's pouring out there." He hesitated, glancing over his shoulder at the empty road behind him, like he expected someone to come out of the shadows. That look sent a small chill down my spine. Then he opened the door and slid into my car, bringing a gust of cold, wet air with him. Up close, I could see he was younger than I first thought, maybe close to my own age, with sharp features and eyes that moved constantly, scanning the mirrors, the windows, the road ahead. His jacket was torn at the shoulder. There was a thin line of blood near his collar that he kept trying to hide by adjusting his collar higher. "Where am I taking you?" I asked, pulling back onto the road, my hands still not quite steady. "Just drive," he said. "I'll tell you where to turn." I should have refused. I should have demanded an address before I moved another inch. But there was something in his voice, an urgency wrapped around careful calm, that made me press the accelerator instead of the brake. "You're bleeding," I said, glancing at him sideways. "Do you want me to take you to a hospital?" "No!" The word came out sharp and fast. He caught himself, softened his tone. "No hospital. I'll be fine. It looks worse than it is." I didn't believe him, but I also didn't push. We drove in silence for a few minutes, the wipers slapping back and forth, the radio murmuring low static, because I hadn't found a clear station in weeks. I kept sneaking glances at him. He kept watching the road behind us through the side mirror. "Were you running from someone?" I finally asked, because the silence had grown too heavy to carry. He turned to look at me properly for the first time. His eyes were dark, almost black in the dim light of the dashboard, and there was something old in them, something that didn't match his young face. "You ask a lot of questions for someone who just picked up a total stranger," he said, but there wasn't any real edge to it. If anything, the corner of his mouth twitched, like he almost wanted to smile. "You're in my car," I said. "I think that earns me at least one question." He studied me for a long moment, long enough that I felt my cheeks warm despite the cold rain outside. "Turn left at the next light," he said instead of answering. I turned left. The neighborhood grew quieter, the streetlights sparser, until we were driving past old warehouses and empty lots I didn't recognize. My stomach tightened. This wasn't a part of town I knew well, and every rational part of my brain screamed that I had made a mistake. "Almost there," he said, as if reading my nerves. "2 more blocks." I gripped the wheel tighter. "You never told me your name." He paused before answering, like he was deciding how much to give me. "Leo," he said finally. "Just Leo? For tonight, that's enough." He gave me a sideways glance that held something like gratitude buried under exhaustion. "You didn't have to stop for me." "No," I agreed. "I didn't. Why did you?" I thought about it honestly instead of giving him some polished, safe answer, because you looked like you needed help, and nobody else was going to stop on a night like this. He was quiet after that, staring out the window at the rain streaking past. When we finally reached the corner he pointed to, an unremarkable street with a shuttered laundromat and a dark alley running beside it, he told me to stop. "This is good," he said, already reaching for the door handle. "Are you sure you don't need a doctor?" I asked, unable to help myself. "That cut on your collar doesn't look small." He paused halfway out of the car, rain already soaking back into his hair. He looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite place, something between surprise and quiet respect, like people didn't usually ask him things like that. "I'll be fine," he said again. Then, almost as an afterthought, he added, "Thank you, Claire." I froze. "I never told you my name." He gave me a small, tired smile, the kind that didn't quite reach his eyes. "No," he agreed, "you didn't." And then he was gone, disappearing into the dark alley beside the laundromat, swallowed by shadow and rain, before I could ask him how he knew it. I sat there for a long moment, engine idling, heart hammering in my chest. My hands were shaking on the wheel, and it took me a full minute to convince myself to drive away. The whole way home, I kept glancing in my mirrors, half expecting headlights to appear behind me, though none ever did. By the time I pulled into my driveway, the rain had softened to a drizzle, and I told myself the strange encounter was over. A stranger, a ride, a mystery I would never solve. That was all it was supposed to be. I locked my car, hurried inside, and changed out of my wet clothes, trying to shake the unsettled feeling that had wrapped itself around my chest since the moment he stepped into my headlights. I made myself a cup of tea, sat on my couch, and tried to focus on the muted television, but my mind kept drifting back to his eyes, the way he scanned every mirror, the way he said my name, like he already knew far more about me than I knew about him. I told myself I was imagining things. That exhaustion and nerves were painting shadows where there weren't any. I finished my tea, checked that my doors were locked twice instead of once, and went to bed earlier than usual, though sleep came slowly and thin. It was nearly midnight when I heard it. A knock at my front door, firm and deliberate, 3 measured raps that were nothing like the frantic banging of an emergency, and nothing like the friendly knock of a neighbor either. It was the kind of knock that expected to be answered. I sat up in bed, my heart slamming against my ribs. For a moment I told myself I had imagined it, that it was only the wind or a branch against the siding. Then it came again, the same 3 measured knocks, patient and certain, like whoever stood on my porch had all the time in the world and knew exactly what they were doing. I grabbed my robe, my hands trembling, and crept toward the front hallway. Through the narrow window beside my door, I could see the porch light glowing on rain-slicked concrete, and standing beneath it, unmoving, was a man I had never seen before in my life. He wore a dark coat that looked far too expensive for my quiet little street, and he stood with the kind of stillness that made my skin prickle. The stillness of someone completely in control of every situation he walked into. Behind him, parked at the curb where my old sedan usually sat alone, was a black car so polished it seemed to swallow the streetlight whole. My hand hovered over the deadbolt. Every instinct told me not to open that door, but something about the way he waited, patient and unmoving, made me feel like refusing would only delay whatever was coming, not stop it. I took a breath, steadied my shaking fingers, and slowly turned the lock. The moment the door opened, his gaze locked onto mine, with an intensity that stole the air from my lungs. He was older than Leo, maybe in his early 30s, with sharp, composed features, and eyes so dark and focused, they seemed to see straight through every wall I had ever built around myself. There was something dangerous in his calm, something that told me this was not a man used to being told no. "Claire Bennett," he said, and it wasn't a question. His voice was low, controlled, carrying an authority that filled the small space of my doorway like smoke filling a room. "My name is Victor Marlowe. I believe you gave someone a ride tonight." The world seemed to tilt slightly beneath my feet. My mouth went dry, and for a moment, I couldn't find a single word to say. Behind him, 2 more men stepped out of the shadows near the black car, silent and watchful, and I realized with a cold, sinking certainty that whatever had walked into my headlights that night had followed me straight home. "I don't know what you're talking about," I managed, though my voice betrayed me with a tremor I couldn't hide. Victor Marlowe's dark eyes studied me for a long moment, patient and unreadable, like he was deciding exactly how much of the truth I was hiding, and exactly how much time he was willing to give me to admit it. "I think you do," he said quietly. "May I come in?" And standing there in my doorway, rain dripping softly from the eaves behind him, I understood with sudden, breathless clarity that the quiet, careful life I had built for myself had just ended, and something far more dangerous was only beginning. I didn't move. I couldn't. My hand tightened on the edge of the door, half wanting to slam it shut, half knowing that whatever this man wanted from me, a locked door was not going to stop him from getting it. The two men behind him hadn't said a word, hadn't even shifted their weight, and somehow that stillness frightened me more than shouting ever could have. "It's late," I said, forcing steadiness into my voice that I didn't feel. "I don't know you, and I don't know why you're here." "You gave a ride to my brother tonight," Victor said, his tone even, almost gentle, though nothing about his presence felt gentle at all. He was hurt. He was being followed, and you stopped for him when most people would have driven straight past. My stomach dropped. Leo, the stranger with the torn jacket and the bleeding collar. Brother. The word settled over me like a stone. "I didn't know who he was," I said quickly. "I just saw someone hurt on the side of the road. I would have done the same for anyone." "I believe you," Victor said, and something in the way he said it almost sounded like respect. "That is precisely why I'm here, instead of someone far less patient than me." A cold weight settled in my chest at those words. Less patient. As if patience was a gift he was choosing to extend, one that could just as easily be withdrawn. "What do you want from me?" I asked, my grip on the door tightening. "Only a conversation," he said. 5 minutes, then I will leave, and you can go back to your evening, as though none of this happened." I glanced past him at the black car idling at the curb, at the two silent men flanking the porch steps, at the rain-slicked street that suddenly felt like the edge of a world I had never known existed. Every rational thought told me to refuse, to close the door and call the police the moment his back was turned, but some quieter instinct, the same one that had made me stop for Leo in the rain, told me that this man was not someone who would simply walk away because I asked him to. 5 minutes, I said finally, stepping back to let him through my doorway, though every nerve in my body screamed that I was making another mistake I couldn't take back. Victor Marlowe stepped inside my home like he belonged there, calm and measured, his dark coat still beaded with rain. The two men remained outside, silent shadows beneath my porch light, and somehow that was almost worse than if they had followed him in. He glanced around my small living room, taking in the modest furniture, the stack of paperwork on my coffee table, the framed photo of my sister on the bookshelf, cataloging every detail with quiet, unreadable eyes. "You live alone," he said. "That's not really your business," I replied, surprising myself with the steadiness in my own voice. The faintest hint of a smile touched his mouth, gone almost as quickly as it appeared. "No," he agreed. "It isn't, not yet." Something about the way he said those last two words sent a chill straight through me, and standing there in my own living room at midnight, facing a man whose calm felt more dangerous than any threat could have been, I understood that whatever had begun in the rain that night was only the first knock at my door, not the last. He didn't sit down. He stood near the edge of my coffee table, hands loosely clasped in front of him, and studied me the way someone studies a puzzle they intend to solve carefully rather than force apart. "You want to know why I'm really here," he said. "Not the polite version. The true one." "I already know the polite version was thin," I said. "Your brother, my car, some kind of trouble. I'm guessing you're not here to thank me for good manners." Something flickered behind his eyes, amusement maybe, or surprise that I had enough nerve left to speak plainly to him. "Leo was followed tonight by people who do not forgive loose ends," he said. "When he called me from a payphone 2 blocks from here, he told me a woman had stopped for him in the rain. He gave me your license plate before he even gave me his own condition." My stomach twisted. "He memorized my plate." "He memorizes everything," Victor said. "It's kept him alive more than once. Tonight, it kept you from becoming a mystery I would have had to solve the hard way." "So, this is a thank you," I said, though it didn't feel like one. It felt like a warning, wrapped in careful words. Partly, he admitted. The other part is less comfortable. The men who were chasing him saw your car. Not clearly, not enough to know your face, but enough to know the make, the color, that a woman was driving. In my world, Claire, enough is sometimes too much. The room seemed to shrink around me. Are you telling me I'm in danger because I stopped to help someone? I'm telling you that kindness has consequences you weren't warned about, he said. And for the first time his voice softened, just slightly, like the words cost him something to say honestly. I intend to make sure those consequences don't reach you. That's why I came tonight, instead of sending someone else. I wanted to see for myself who you were, and I wanted you to hear this from me, not from a stranger on your porch a second time. I wrapped my arms around myself, feeling suddenly cold despite the warmth of my own living room. What exactly does that mean? You'll make sure. Are you going to have people watching my house? Following me to work? For a while, he said simply, no apology in his tone, only fact. Until I'm certain the men looking for Leo have lost interest in the car that helped him disappear. You can't just decide that for me, I said, my voice rising despite my effort to stay calm. This is my life, my home. You can't put people outside my window because it's convenient for your family's business. No, he agreed, surprising me. I can't decide it for you, but I can tell you what happens if I don't, and let you decide for yourself which risk you'd rather live with. I stared at him, searching his face for some sign of manipulation, some tell that would let me dismiss him as simply dangerous and self-serving. But there was only that same unsettling calm, patient and immovable, like a man who had learned long ago that panic solved nothing, and control solved almost everything. Tell me, I said finally. There is a rival family, Victor said. Men who have spent the better part of a year trying to find weaknesses in mine. Leo was meeting a contact tonight, gathering information we needed. The meeting went wrong. He was heard escaping, and the men chasing him are not the kind who simply give up because their target vanished into the rain. So they'll keep looking for him, I said. They will, Victor confirmed, and if they find the car that helped him vanish, they will ask questions. I would rather those questions never reach your door. That means, for a short time, some of my people will be nearby, not intruding, not announcing themselves. Simply making certain nothing happens to you because you were kind enough to stop in the rain. I sank slowly onto the arm of my couch, my legs suddenly unsteady beneath me. This is insane, I whispered, more to myself than to him. Yesterday, my biggest problem was a client who wouldn't return my calls about his tax filings. Now there's a mafia boss standing in my living room telling me strangers might come looking for my car. I understand this is difficult to hear, Victor said, and there was something almost gentle in how he said it, a contrast so sharp against everything else about him that it caught me off guard. I don't enjoy bringing danger into places that didn't ask for it, but I would rather you hear the truth from me tonight than discover it unprepared later. And if I say no? I asked, lifting my chin, trying to find some scrap of control in a night that had stripped it all away. If I tell you to leave, take your men, and never come back? For a long moment he said nothing, simply studying me with those dark, unreadable eyes. Then I would respect that, he said finally. But I would still make certain, quietly and from a distance, that you remain safe. Whether you allow me to protect you openly or not, Claire, that debt exists because of my brother, and I do not walk away from debts. Something in the way he said it, firm and absolute, told me this wasn't negotiation. It was simply how his world worked, whether I agreed to be part of it or not. How long? I asked quietly. Until this is over. I don't know yet, he admitted. Days, perhaps a few weeks. Once we're certain the men looking for Leo have moved on, or once we've dealt with them directly, life will return to whatever normal looked like before tonight. Dealt with them, I repeated slowly. What does that mean exactly? It means you don't need to worry about the details, Victor said, and something in his tone closed that particular door firmly. You need only worry about your own safety, which I intend to make certain of. I studied him for a long moment, this man who had walked into my home uninvited and somehow made it feel like the most natural thing in the world, who spoke about danger and protection with the same calm, measured voice, as though both were simply tools he used without hesitation. "Why does this feel like I'm not actually being given a choice?" I said quietly, "even though you keep saying I am." The faintest smile touched his mouth again, gone as quickly as it came. "Because you're perceptive," he said. "And because you're right. I would prefer your cooperation. I don't require it." There was something oddly honest about that admission, more honest than I expected from a man in his position, and strangely, it made me trust him slightly more rather than less. At least he wasn't pretending this was a simple, friendly visit between neighbors. "Fine," I said, exhaling slowly. "Let's say I accept this. Watching me, protecting me, whatever you want to call it. How exactly is that going to work? Are strange men going to be parked outside my house every night, following me to the grocery store?" "Discreetly," Victor said. "You likely won't notice most of it. A car passing more frequently than usual. Someone nearby when you leave work. Small things designed to keep you safe without disrupting the life you're used to living." "And Leo," I said, the question surfacing before I could stop it. "Is he all right?" Something shifted subtly in Victor's expression, a flicker of surprise, perhaps, that I had asked about his brother's well-being at all after everything. "He'll recover," he said. "The wound looked worse than it was, though he'll carry a scar as a reminder to be more careful next time." He said thank you, I said quietly, remembering the strange, tired smile Leo had given me before disappearing into the alley, and then he said my name. I never told him. "He asked someone to look up your plate the moment he reached a safe phone," Victor said. "It's how I found you tonight, and how I intend to make certain nothing happens to you because of what you did for him." I wrapped my arms tighter around myself, trying to process the strange, dizzying shift my ordinary life had taken in the span of a single evening. A stranger in the rain. A knock at midnight. A dangerous, composed man standing in my living room, speaking about protection and rival families like they were simply parts of an ordinary conversation. "I have work in the morning," I said finally, exhaustion beginning to creep in beneath the fear. "An actual normal job, with actual normal problems." "Then I'll let you sleep," Victor said, straightening, his tone shifting back into the same calm authority he had carried through my door. "I only ask one thing before I go." "What's that?" "If anything feels wrong," he said, "anyone unfamiliar near your home, any strange car, anyone who approaches you asking questions about tonight, call this number." He withdrew a small card from his coat pocket, offering it to me with 2 fingers, the gesture oddly formal against the intensity of everything else about him. "Someone will answer immediately, day or night." I took the card, my fingers brushing briefly against his, and felt a strange, electric awareness at the contact that had nothing to do with fear at all. I pushed the feeling away immediately, unwilling to examine it too closely. "Thank you," I said, then paused, surprised at myself for saying it at all, for telling me the truth, I mean. "You could have just posted your men outside without saying anything." "I could have," Victor agreed, "but I find people cooperate more easily when they understand why, rather than simply being told what to do." He moved toward the door, and I followed, my legs still unsteady beneath me. At the threshold he paused, glancing back at me with an expression I couldn't quite decipher, something between assessment and quiet curiosity. "Most people," he said slowly, "would have driven past Leo tonight, called someone else to deal with it, looked away and told themselves it wasn't their problem. I'm not most people," I said, surprising myself with the steadiness in my voice. "No," Victor said, the faintest trace of something warmer passing behind his dark eyes. "I'm beginning to see that." Then he stepped out into the rain, his men falling into step beside him without a word, and the black car pulled away from the curb and disappeared into the wet, empty street, leaving me standing alone in my doorway with a small white card in my hand, and the growing, unsettling certainty that my quiet life had changed in ways I couldn't yet fully understand. I closed the door slowly, turned the deadbolt, and stood in the silence of my own home for a long moment, listening to my own heartbeat gradually slow. I looked down at the card in my hand. It held only a phone number, no name, no company, nothing that would mean anything to anyone who didn't already know what it represented. I didn't sleep much that night. Every creak of the house, every gust of wind against the windows, sent my pulse spiking, my mind replaying the calm, measured way Victor Marlowe had spoken about danger, as though it were simply weather to be managed. I kept thinking about his eyes, dark and watchful, and the strange warmth that had passed behind them in that final moment before he left. By the time morning light crept through my curtains, I had convinced myself that whatever had happened the night before was an isolated, terrifying incident that would resolve itself quietly, exactly as Victor had promised. I told myself I would go to work, answer emails, review tax documents, and slowly forget the entire strange episode had ever happened. I was wrong. Walking to my car that morning, I noticed a dark sedan parked across the street that hadn't been there before. A man behind the wheel, who didn't so much as glance in my direction, yet somehow felt entirely aware of my every movement. My heart climbed into my throat as I unlocked my car door, and for one long, breathless moment, I understood with absolute clarity that Victor Marlowe's world had not simply visited my life the night before. It had settled into it, quietly, permanently, and there was no telling yet how far it would reach before it was finished. The days that followed settled into a strange, uneasy rhythm. I woke, I dressed, I drove to the small accounting office where I had worked for the past 4 years, and the entire time, some quiet, watchful part of my mind kept scanning the streets around me, searching for a dark sedan I wasn't supposed to notice. At first, I told myself I was imagining most of it, that ordinary cars simply looked more suspicious now, because I was primed to see danger everywhere. But by the third day, I couldn't deny the pattern anymore. The same car, different drivers, always positioned somewhere I could see it if I looked. Never close enough to feel like a threat, but never quite absent either. My coworker Nora noticed something was wrong before I ever said a word about it. She had the kind of sharp, curious eyes that missed nothing, and on Thursday afternoon, she leaned against the edge of my desk, arms crossed, studying me with open suspicion. "You've checked that window 4 times in the last 10 minutes, she said. "Either you're expecting someone, or you've finally lost your mind from doing Mr. Halbrook's taxes 3 years in a row." I forced a laugh that didn't quite land right. "Just tired," I said. "Didn't sleep well." "Uh-huh," Nora said, clearly unconvinced, but she let it go, which I was grateful for, because I had no idea how I would have explained any of it without sounding completely insane. The truth was, I didn't fully understand it myself. Victor Marlowe had walked into my life for less than 20 minutes and left behind a card with a phone number and a promise of protection I hadn't fully agreed to, yet somehow found myself accepting anyway, because the alternative felt far more frightening. That evening, as I left the office and walked toward my car in the mostly empty parking lot, I noticed a man leaning casually against a street lamp nearby, dressed plainly, unremarkable in almost every way, except for the careful, unhurried way his eyes tracked my movement without ever quite looking directly at me. My pulse quickened, and I fumbled slightly with my keys before finally getting my car door open. I drove home taking a longer route than usual, checking my mirrors more times than I could count, and when I finally pulled into my driveway, my hands were trembling again, exactly like they had been the night I first opened my door to Victor Marlowe. 2 days later, everything changed in a smaller, stranger way. I was leaving the small grocery store near my house, arms full of bags, when one slipped from my grip and spilled across the wet pavement. Before I could even crouch down to gather the scattered cans, a man appeared beside me, kneeling to help, gathering everything back into the bag with quiet efficiency. "Let me help you with that," he said, his voice calm, almost gentle. When I looked up, startled, I recognized him instantly, one of the 2 men who had stood silently behind Victor on my porch that first terrible night. "You're one of his," I said, more statement than question. The man smiled slightly, handing me the last can. "Marcus," he said simply, introducing himself like we were meeting at some ordinary social gathering, rather than in a grocery store parking lot, after days of being quietly followed. "Mr. Marlowe asked me to keep an eye on things. Groceries included, apparently." Something about his easy, almost friendly demeanor eased a small fraction of the tension I had been carrying since the knock at my door. "Is this normal?" I asked. "Grown men following women around grocery stores?" "Not usually," Marcus admitted, a hint of dry humor in his voice. But Mr. Marlowe was very specific about your safety. He doesn't often make that kind of request personally. What does that mean? I asked, curiosity slipping through despite myself. Marcus considered his answer carefully, glancing briefly toward the street before speaking. It means he doesn't usually involve himself this closely in matters like this. Normally it's handled by people further down, without him checking in directly. He paused, studying me with a thoughtful expression. You made an impression, Miss Bennet. I didn't know what to say to that, so I simply thanked him for his help and hurried home, my mind spinning with questions I wasn't sure I wanted answered. Victor returned to my doorstep 4 days after our first meeting, this time without warning, standing on my porch in the soft evening light, looking far less imposing than he had in the storm, though no less commanding. He wore a simple dark jacket instead of his long coat, and for the first time, I noticed the faint shadows beneath his eyes, the small signs of exhaustion beneath his composed exterior. I won't take much of your time, he said when I opened the door, something almost hesitant in his tone that hadn't been there before. I wanted to check on you myself, rather than only through reports. Reports, I repeated, raising an eyebrow. So people really have been watching me. For your safety, he said, though there was the faintest trace of something like embarrassment in his expression, quickly smoothed away. May I come in for a few minutes? I studied him for a moment, weighing the strange mixture of unease and curiosity that had been building in me since our first encounter. Finally, I stepped back and let him through the door. This time, he accepted my offer to sit, settling onto the edge of my couch with the same careful, controlled posture I remembered from before. I made 2 cups of tea without really thinking about it, an old habit of hospitality I couldn't quite shake, even under strange circumstances, and set one in front of him before sitting across in the armchair. How are you managing? He asked, wrapping his hands loosely around the warm cup, though he didn't drink from it. Managing, I said slowly. That's an interesting word for it. I've been followed to the grocery store. I flinch every time I see a black car. My coworker thinks I've lost my mind. Something flickered across his face, and to my surprise, it looked almost like guilt. I'm sorry for the disruption to your life, he said quietly. That was never my intention. What was your intention then? I asked, genuinely curious now rather than simply defensive. He considered the question carefully before answering, as though weighing exactly how much honesty to offer. To keep you safe without you ever needing to think about the reasons why, he admitted. I underestimated how difficult that would be to accomplish quietly. So this is you admitting you're bad at being subtle, I said, allowing a small, teasing edge into my voice despite everything. The faintest smile touched his mouth, genuine this time, softening the sharp lines of his face in a way that caught me off guard. Apparently so, he said. It seems you notice more than most people do. We sat in a strange, comfortable silence for a moment, the tension of the past few days easing slightly in the warm light of my living room. I found myself studying him more closely than I had allowed myself to before, noticing the small details beneath his composed exterior, the faint scar along his jaw, the way his shoulders carried tension he never let show in his voice. Can I ask you something? I said finally. Of course. Why does someone in your position handle this personally? I asked. Marcus told me it's unusual for you to be this involved. Victor was quiet for a long moment, his dark eyes studying the cup in his hands, rather than meeting mine. Leo is the only family I have left, he said finally, his voice quieter than I had heard it before. When someone helps him without asking for anything in return, especially someone with no connection to my world, it matters more to me than perhaps it should. Something about the raw honesty in his tone caught me off guard, softened the careful walls I had been building since that first terrifying night. He seemed like he was used to running, I said gently. Is that normal for him? More than I'd like, Victor admitted, his jaw tightening slightly. He handles matters that require someone quick and careful, someone who can move through dangerous situations without drawing attention. It's necessary work, but it comes with risks I can't always control, no matter how much I plan. That must be difficult, I said quietly, worrying about him constantly. It is, he said simply. And something in the honesty of that admission made the powerful, controlled man sitting across from me feel suddenly, unexpectedly human. We talked longer than I expected that evening, the conversation drifting away from danger and rival families into smaller, quieter subjects. He asked about my work, listening with genuine interest as I explained the small satisfactions of helping people untangle their finances, of bringing order to chaos in ways he seemed to understand more than I anticipated. "You like solving problems," he observed at one point, a thoughtful expression crossing his face. "Small, practical ones. Numbers that either balance or they don't." "I suppose I do," I said, surprised he had noticed something so specific about me from such a short conversation. "It's simple, clean, nothing like whatever world you're describing." "No," he agreed, a faint, wry smile touching his mouth. "Nothing like my world at all." When he finally rose to leave, later than either of us seemed to have intended, he paused near my door, studying me with an expression I still couldn't fully read, somewhere between careful assessment and something warmer he seemed reluctant to name. "Thank you for the tea," he said, "and for listening. I don't often have the chance for conversations like this." "You could just visit as yourself sometime," I said, the words slipping out before I fully considered them, instead of only when there's danger to discuss. Something shifted behind his eyes, surprise mixed with something that looked almost like hope, quickly guarded again beneath his usual composure. "I'd like that," he said quietly. "Though I should warn you, danger tends to follow me, even when I'd prefer it didn't." "I'm starting to understand that," I said, managing a small, wry smile of my own. He left soon after, and I stood by my window, watching his car pull away, the same unsettled warmth from our first handshake lingering in my chest, tangled together with the fear that still hadn't fully faded since that first stormy night. The following week brought a strange, uneasy calm. The dark sedan remained a quiet presence near my street, though I found myself noticing it less as unease and more as an odd, unfamiliar comfort. Marcus appeared occasionally, always briefly, always with some small, practical excuse, checking in with an easy warmth that made the whole strange arrangement feel less like surveillance and more like something closer to care. Victor visited twice more that week, always in the evening, always staying longer than either of us seemed to plan. Our conversations grew easier each time, drifting from cautious small talk into something deeper, something that felt dangerously close to friendship, despite everything separating our two very different lives. It was during his third visit that the fragile calm shattered completely. Halfway through a conversation about nothing important, his phone buzzed sharply against the coffee table, and the moment he glanced at the screen, every trace of warmth vanished from his expression, replaced instantly by the same sharp, controlled intensity I remembered from our first meeting. "I need to go," he said, already rising from the couch, his voice suddenly clipped and urgent. "What's wrong?" I asked, my own pulse quickening in response to the sudden shift in him. He hesitated at my door, his hand on the frame, clearly weighing how much to tell me. "The men who were looking for Leo," he said finally, his jaw tight. "They've found something, a lead they shouldn't have." My stomach dropped. Does that mean they know about me? Victor's expression darkened, and for the first time since I'd met him, I saw something close to real fear flicker behind his composed exterior, though it wasn't for himself. "I don't know yet," he admitted, "but I intend to find out before they do." He left quickly after that, his car pulling away from the curb with a speed that hadn't been there in any of his previous visits, and I stood alone in my doorway once again, the warm, comfortable evening shattered into something far more dangerous. The quiet calm of the past week, suddenly feeling like nothing more than the stillness before a much larger storm. I barely slept that night, my mind replaying Victor's darkened expression over and over, the way his voice had shifted from warm to razor-sharp in the span of a single heartbeat. I kept the porch light on, kept checking the street through the gap in my curtains, though the familiar dark sedan seemed to have vanished entirely, leaving my street feeling emptier and far less safe than it had in days. By morning, exhaustion had worn my nerves thin, and I dragged myself through work in a daze, barely registering Nora's concerned glances, or the stack of paperwork waiting on my desk. My phone stayed silent all day. No message from Victor, no word from Marcus, nothing to explain what had happened after he left my house the night before. The silence broke that evening, not with a phone call, but with something far worse. I arrived home just after 6, balancing my bag and a small stack of mail, and the moment I stepped through my front door, I knew instantly that something was wrong. The air felt different, disturbed, and my kitchen drawer, the one I always kept closed, hung open several inches. My heart began to pound as I set my bag down slowly, scanning the room with sharp, frightened eyes. Nothing appeared obviously missing. My laptop still sat on the counter. My jewelry box remained untouched on my dresser when I checked. But small things were subtly wrong. A chair pushed slightly out of place. Papers on my desk shifted from where I always left them. The unmistakable sense that someone had moved carefully through my home, searching for something, or simply making certain I knew they could. My hands trembled as I pulled out the small white card Victor had given me that first night, dialing the number with shaking fingers. It rang only once before a calm, alert voice answered. "This is Marcus. Are you all right, Miss Bennett?" "Someone was in my house," I said, my voice cracking despite my effort to stay steady. "Nothing's missing, but things have been moved. I don't know if they're still." "Leave the house immediately," Marcus said, his tone sharpening instantly. "Go to your car, lock the doors, and drive somewhere public. I'm sending someone to you right now, and I'm calling Mr. Marlowe." I didn't argue. I grabbed my bag, my keys, and hurried back out my front door on legs that barely felt steady enough to carry me, sliding into my car and locking the doors the moment I was inside. My hands shook so badly, it took 3 attempts to get my key into the ignition. I drove to a small, brightly lit diner a few streets away, the kind of place with too many windows and too many witnesses for anyone to try anything, and sat in a booth near the back, my untouched coffee growing cold in front of me while I waited, jumping at every chime of the door. Victor arrived less than 20 minutes later, moving through the diner with an urgency that drew glances from nearby tables, sliding into the booth across from me with none of his usual composed calm. His eyes searched my face, sharp and worried, in a way I hadn't seen from him before. "Are you hurt?" he asked immediately. "No," I said, though my voice still trembled. "No, just scared. Someone was in my house, Victor. They went through my things." His jaw tightened, a muscle flexing sharply along the side of his face. "This is what I was afraid of," he said quietly. "The lead the rival family found last night. It led them closer to you than I anticipated. I should have moved you somewhere safer the moment I suspected." "Who did this?" I asked. "The same people who were chasing Leo?" "Dominic Vane's people," Victor said, the name coming out sharp and bitter, like it left a foul taste behind. "He runs the family we've been at odds with for over a year. If they've connected you to Leo's escape that night, they'll see you as leverage, a way to reach me." The word leverage settled over me like a physical weight, cold and suffocating. "So this is happening because of me," I said quietly, "because I stopped my car in the rain." "No," Victor said firmly, reaching across the table, his hand covering mine with a warmth that startled me despite the fear still coursing through my veins. "This is happening because men like Dominic Vane exploit any kindness they can find as a weakness. What you did that night wasn't a mistake, Claire. It was decency in a world that punishes decency far too often." I looked down at his hand covering mine, steady and warm despite the tension radiating through the rest of him, and felt something shift inside my chest, fear tangled together with a fierce, unexpected gratitude that he had come the moment I called, without hesitation. "What happens now?" I asked. "You can't stay at your house tonight," Victor said, "not until we understand exactly how much they know, and how close they've gotten. I have a property outside the city, secure, private. I'd like you to stay there until this is resolved." "Victor, that's—" I started to protest, but he cut in gently, his thumb brushing lightly over my knuckles, in a gesture that felt far more intimate than either of us had allowed ourselves before. "I know it's a lot to ask," he said, "but I would rather you be safe and inconvenienced than remain in a house that strangers have already walked through uninvited." I thought about my quiet, ordinary home, the careful life I had built for myself, and the unsettling image of someone moving silently through my rooms, touching my belongings, searching for whatever piece of information might help them reach the man sitting across from me now. The fear won easily over my hesitation. "All right," I said quietly. "I'll go." Relief flickered briefly across his expression, before it settled back into careful control. "Thank you," he said. "I'll have Marcus retrieve whatever you need from your house tonight, under guard. You won't need to go back until it's safe." We left the diner together, his hand resting lightly at the small of my back as he guided me toward his car, a gesture that felt protective rather than presumptuous, and despite the fear still tightening my chest, I found myself grateful for the solid, steady presence beside me. The property he brought me to sat well outside the city, tucked behind tall iron gates and a long, winding driveway lined with old trees. The house itself was large but understated, more elegant than intimidating, and inside, it carried a quiet, lived-in warmth that surprised me, given everything I had assumed about the kind of world Victor Marlowe inhabited. "This was my parents' home," he explained, noticing my curious glance around the comfortable living room. "I don't often bring people here." "Why bring me then?" I asked, genuinely curious. He considered the question carefully, his dark eyes meeting mine with an intensity that made my pulse quicken for reasons that had nothing to do with fear. "Because I trust the people who guard this place completely," he said. "And because, if I'm honest, I wanted you somewhere I could see for myself that you were safe, rather than only hearing it in a report." Something about the quiet honesty in his voice loosened a knot of tension I had been carrying since the moment I found my kitchen drawer open. We sat together in the large, comfortable kitchen, while members of his household moved quietly through the house, professional and unobtrusive, preparing a guest room and checking the grounds with careful, practiced efficiency. "Tell me about Dominic Vane," I said eventually, needing to understand exactly what I had become tangled in. "Why does he hate your family so much?" Victor's expression darkened slightly, old weariness surfacing beneath his composed exterior. "Old history," he said. "Territory disputes going back to our father's time. Resentment that never fully faded. Leo's work these past months has been gathering information that could finally end the conflict permanently, in our favor. Vane knows this, and he's growing desperate." "Desperate men are dangerous," I said quietly. "Yes," Victor agreed, "which is exactly why I need you here, where I can guarantee your safety, until we've dealt with him properly." "Dealt with him," I repeated, the same uneasy phrase from our first conversation returning to unsettle me once again. "What does that actually mean, Victor?" He met my gaze steadily, no longer softening the truth the way he had during our earlier conversations. "It means removing the threat he poses," he said, "whatever that requires." A chill ran through me at the quiet certainty in his voice, the reminder that beneath the warmth I had begun to feel toward him, Victor Marlowe remained a man capable of things I couldn't fully understand or condone. And yet, sitting there in his kitchen, safe within walls guarded by people who answered to him without question, I found I couldn't quite bring myself to be afraid of him, not the way I had been that first terrible night. "I don't fully understand your world," I admitted quietly. "And some of it frightens me. But you've kept your word so far. You've protected me, told me the truth even when it was difficult to hear." "I intend to keep doing both," Victor said, his voice softer now, the earlier hardness fading into something gentler as he studied me across the kitchen table. "Whatever it takes." The following days passed in a strange, suspended calm within the walls of that quiet house. Victor came and went, handling matters I wasn't privy to, but always returning each evening, always finding time to sit with me, to ask about my day, despite everything else weighing on him. Leo visited once, fully recovered, offering me a warm, genuine smile and a heartfelt thanks that felt entirely different from the guarded stranger who had climbed into my car that stormy night. It was on the fourth evening, as Victor and I sat together on the wide back porch overlooking the dark, quiet grounds, that Marcus appeared suddenly at the door, his expression tight with urgency that immediately shattered the fragile peace we had built. "We found him," Marcus said, his eyes moving briefly to me before settling on Victor. "Vane. He knows about this location." Victor rose immediately, every trace of the warmth he had shown me moments before, hardening back into sharp, controlled focus. "How close?" he asked. "Close enough that we need to move quickly," Marcus said grimly. I stood as well, my heart hammering against my ribs, the fragile safety of the past few days collapsing around me in an instant. Victor turned to me, his expression fierce and protective, and in that moment, I understood with absolute certainty that whatever came next would decide far more than simply my own safety. It would decide everything. "Take her to the safe room," Victor said to Marcus, his voice sharp with authority, though his eyes never left mine, something fierce and protective burning behind them. "Now." "No," I said, surprising even myself with the firmness in my voice. "Tell me what's happening. I'm not hiding in a room not knowing whether you're safe." Victor's jaw tightened, torn between his instinct to protect me and something else, something that looked almost like respect for my refusal to simply be tucked away and forgotten. "Vane has men approaching the property," he said quickly. "We have maybe 10 minutes before they reach the gate. My people are already positioned. This ends tonight, one way or another." My stomach twisted with fear, but beneath it, something steadier held firm, a strange, unexpected resolve that surprised me. "What can I do?" I asked. "Stay safe," Victor said firmly, taking my hands in his grip warm and urgent. "That's the only thing I need from you right now. Please, Claire." I nodded, swallowing my fear, and let Marcus guide me quickly through the house, toward a reinforced room hidden behind what looked like an ordinary study, its door thick and solid, its walls lined with something that muffled every sound from beyond it the moment it closed. Marcus stayed with me, his expression alert and focused, listening to a small radio device clipped to his collar that crackled occasionally with brief, clipped updates I couldn't fully understand. The minutes stretched unbearably long. I sat on the edge of a small couch inside the room, my hands clenched tightly together, straining to hear anything beyond the thick walls, imagining every possible danger unfolding somewhere in the darkness outside. Marcus remained calm beside me, occasionally offering brief, reassuring words that did little to ease the tight knot of fear lodged in my chest. "They're at the gate," Marcus said quietly, listening intently to the device at his collar. "Perimeter's holding." "Is Victor out there?" I asked, unable to keep the fear from my voice. "He's coordinating from the east side," Marcus said. "He knows what he's doing, Miss Bennett. This isn't the first time he's faced Vane's people." The reassurance helped only slightly, my mind filling with every possible terrible outcome despite my best efforts to stay calm. Minutes passed like hours, the muffled sound of raised voices occasionally reaching us through the thick walls, followed by long stretches of tense, uncertain silence. Then, abruptly, the radio at Marcus's collar crackled sharply, a clipped voice delivering words too fast for me to catch, but the visible relief that immediately washed over Marcus's face told me everything I needed to know before he even spoke. "It's over," he said, exhaling slowly. Vane's men retreated, no serious injuries on our side. Relief flooded through me so suddenly that my legs nearly buckled beneath me as I stood. "Victor?" I asked immediately. "Safe," Marcus confirmed, already moving toward the door. "Come on. He'll want to see you." I hurried after him through the quiet house, my heart still pounding, until we reached the front entrance where Victor stood speaking quietly with two of his men, a small cut above his eyebrow, the only visible sign of the confrontation that had just unfolded. The moment his eyes found mine, everything else around him seemed to fade from his attention entirely. "Claire," he said, closing the distance between us in a few quick strides. I didn't think, didn't hesitate, simply closed the remaining space myself, and wrapped my arms around him, feeling the tension finally drain from both of us at once. His arms came around me firmly, his breath unsteady against my hair, and for a long moment neither of us said anything at all, simply holding on to the relief of the danger finally being over. "You're hurt," I said softly, pulling back just enough to gently touch the small cut above his eyebrow. "It's nothing," he said, though his eyes stayed locked on mine with an intensity that made my breath catch. "I was more concerned about you the entire time. I was terrified for you," I admitted quietly. Something shifted in his expression then, the last of his careful composure finally giving way entirely. "Claire," he said softly, his hand rising to gently cup my face, "I need to tell you something, and I need you to know I mean every word of it." "Then tell me," I said, my heart racing for reasons that had nothing to do with fear now. "From the moment you stopped for Leo in the rain," he said, I've been trying to convince myself this was only about protecting someone who helped my family. But it stopped being only that, days ago. I care about you, Claire. Far more than I expected to, and far more than I know how to properly express. My breath caught at the raw honesty in his voice, so different from the careful, controlled man who had first knocked on my door demanding answers. I care about you too, I admitted softly. Even though none of this makes any sense, even though I never imagined my life would look anything like this. I know this world isn't the one you chose, Victor said quietly, his thumb brushing gently along my cheek. And I understand if it's more than you want to carry. But I would very much like the chance to build something real with you, Claire, if you'll allow it. I looked up at him, this powerful, complicated man who had walked into my ordinary life and turned it upside down in the span of a single stormy night, and felt none of the fear that had gripped me during our very first conversation. Only warmth, steady and certain, settling comfortably into place where uncertainty had been before. I stopped for a stranger in the rain, because it felt like the right thing to do, I said softly. I think staying, choosing this, choosing you, feels exactly the same way. The smile that broke across Victor's face then was unlike anything I had seen from him before, unguarded and genuinely warm, transforming his sharp, controlled features into something entirely different. He leaned down slowly, giving me every opportunity to step back if I wanted to, and when I didn't, his lips met mine in a kiss that was gentle at first, then deepened with all the relief and tension of everything we had both been carrying since that very first night. When we finally parted, breathless and smiling, Marcus cleared his throat pointedly nearby, a knowing grin tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Should I have everyone give you two a moment?" he asked dryly. Victor laughed, a genuine warm sound I hadn't heard from him before, and pulled me gently against his side. "In a moment," he said, though his eyes never left mine. "First, I want to make sure Vane's threat is fully finished." Over the following days, the details slowly emerged. Dominic Vane, cornered and exposed after his failed attempt against the property, had lost the support of his own people almost overnight, his reputation shattered by the reckless desperation of his final move. Without loyal men willing to follow him further, his influence crumbled quickly, and within a week, Victor's people confirmed that Vane had fled the city entirely. His threat to Victor's family effectively ended. Leo visited often during those final days, his easy warmth and genuine gratitude, a welcome contrast to the tension of everything that had come before. "You saved my life that night," he told me once, sitting across from me at Victor's kitchen table while Victor spoke quietly with Marcus nearby. "I don't think I ever properly thanked you for that." "You're welcome," I said, smiling at him. "Though I think your brother has more than made up for it since." Leo laughed, glancing toward Victor with obvious affection. "He doesn't usually let people in like this," he said. "Whatever you did, Claire, it worked. I haven't seen him this at ease in years." I found myself smiling at the observation, watching Victor across the room, the careful, guarded man I had first met on my porch, now standing easily among people he trusted completely, his shoulders relaxed in a way I hadn't seen before that night. It was nearly 2 weeks after Vane's defeat that Victor finally brought me back to my own home, the quiet, ordinary house I had left behind in fear that terrible evening. He walked through every room with me, checking carefully despite Marcus's earlier assurance that everything had been thoroughly secured, until we finally settled onto my familiar couch together, the same one where our very first real conversation had taken place. "It feels strange being back here," I admitted, glancing around at the small, familiar space that suddenly felt smaller after weeks spent within the quiet grandeur of Victor's family home. "Does it feel unsafe?" Victor asked, immediately attentive, ready to address any lingering fear. "No," I said, smiling softly. "It feels like my life before all of this. Simple, small. I think I just have to figure out how it fits together now with everything after." Victor took my hand gently, his thumb brushing softly over my knuckles. "You don't have to figure it out all at once," he said. "I'm not going anywhere, Claire. Whatever pace feels right to you, I'll match it." I studied him for a long moment. This man who had once terrified me standing in my doorway, now sitting beside me with nothing but warmth and patience in his eyes. "I don't think I want to keep two separate lives," I said finally, the quiet one I had before, and whatever this new one looks like with you. I think I'd rather they simply become one life. Something soft and hopeful passed behind Victor's dark eyes at those words. What are you saying exactly? He asked quietly. I'm saying I don't want you to only visit when there's danger to manage, I said, echoing words I had spoken to him weeks earlier, though everything about the moment felt entirely different now. I want you here because you want to be here. I want to learn about your world properly, not just the parts that frighten me. Victor's expression softened into something achingly tender, and he lifted my hand gently to his lips, pressing a soft kiss against my knuckles. Then that is exactly what I intend to give you, he said. All of it, Claire. Whatever you're willing to accept. We sat together as the evening light faded slowly outside my familiar windows, and for the first time since that stormy night when a stranger had stumbled into my headlights, I felt something settle fully into place inside my chest. Not fear, not uncertainty, but a quiet, steady sense that whatever unexpected path had led me here, it was exactly where I was meant to be. Months later, looking back, I would often think about that single choice, the decision to stop my car in the rain for a stranger I owed nothing to. It had upended everything I thought I understood about my own careful, predictable life, bringing danger and fear I never could have anticipated. But it had also brought me Victor, brought me a strength in myself I hadn't known existed, and taught me that sometimes the most frightening beginnings lead to the safest, most unexpected endings. Victor kept his promise. He visited not only when danger required his presence, but simply because he wanted to be near me, sharing quiet evenings, ordinary conversations, small moments that slowly wove our two very different worlds together into something that felt, against every expectation, like home. I never stopped being a little amazed by it all, the accountant who spent her days quietly balancing numbers, now sharing her life with a man whose world moved in shadows and calculated risks far beyond anything in her careful spreadsheets. But somehow, between his steady strength and my quiet resolve, we found a balance of our own, one built not on the danger that had first brought us together, but on the trust and care that had grown steadily in its place. And on quiet evenings, when Victor sat beside me on that same familiar couch, his hand resting warmly over mine, I would sometimes think back to that rainy night and the stranger who had climbed into my car with a torn jacket and careful, watchful eyes. I would never regret stopping for him, not once, because that single choice had led me, unexpectedly and irrevocably, straight into the life I hadn't known I was searching for all along.